Hello, everybody. My name is Reese, and this is Where You Want to Be, where I take you with me around the world as I travel it and study history in it, both in university and beyond, to help you find your place within the world we live in. My belief is that the history of the world tells us everything we need to know about what to do today and could give you a lot of lessons about how to live your life on a personal scale. So, my hope is that listening to this helps you learn about the world and helps you find out a lot about yourself and things about the world in general. So today we are covering Copenhagen. This is the capital city of Denmark, and I was lucky enough to visit, 2 years ago now, in 2024. And I'm very excited to get into it. So we're going to start with a brief history, then we're going to get into some travel advice, some historical sites, and we'll keep on going from there. So I thank you guys for listening, and I thank you for tuning in. Let's do this thing. Before we get into the history, I want to do a little breakdown of some facts and the etymology of Copenhagen. So the name Copenhagen actually comes from the Old Norse word Kaupmannahof, which means merchant's harbor. This name reflects the city's long history of marketing and trading on its ports across the canals and all the waters that it sits on top of. Now for some facts, similar to Amsterdam, biking is a major part of the culture here in Copenhagen. Copenhagen has over 675,000 bicyclists, and that is over half the population, and half of the population uses bikes to commute to and from work. Despite not being known as a nation of really great cuisine, Denmark compared to France or a nation like Italy, the capital Copenhagen is actually considered the cuisine capital of the world, or the culinary capital of the world, because of the fact that there were so many Michelin star restaurants here throughout recent history of Copenhagen. This all started a few years back with Noma, which was multiple years in a row considered the best restaurant in the world before its closure. But because of it closing, a lot of the chefs that were part of Noma splintered off and stayed in Copenhagen and have now opened a high number of Michelin restaurants across the city instead of just the one. And for our final fact, the Copenhagen city center has the longest pedestrian shopping strip in all of Europe. It's just over a half mile or 1.1 kilometers long, and it is literally the longest in all of Europe. And now that we've done that, we can get into some history. The start of Copenhagen's history begins around the 9th to 10th century, when Viking fishing settlements started to pop up in the area. The real history of Copenhagen doesn't start until actually after the Viking era. The Vikings did a lot to develop this area, brought in different cultures, religions, developed a fishing system, things that were the basis of Copenhagen and eventually Greater Denmark. But the real history begins after. What happens after is Christianity. Christians come into the area and start the Christian era of Northern Europe. Because of that, a lot more influence comes in from around the world as the rest of the world started to Christianize around this time. In 1167, a bishop from Roskilde started to develop a sort of castle on the coast to defend the mouth of the canal that led into what became Copenhagen. The construction of this castle is considered the actual start of Copenhagen history, according to some historians. Now, things didn't stay good for long. As soon as we get to the 1200s, ramparts started to be formed around different areas, be built by humans and nature itself around Copenhagen, and were very important to just the way the canals were navigated and different parts of Copenhagen were used for a lot of its history. But things started to get bad right around 1350 when the Black Death hit Copenhagen. The Black Death plague swept through Copenhagen and killed a huge amount of the city's population. The Great Copenhagen Harbor used to be a lot wider, but it has been bridged. The canal, the harbor area has been bridged over and over, and that has made it smaller. Even back at this time, it was smaller than when it first was constructed. But because of this, the early 1400s were a time when the harbor was being used for Danish fishermen so that they could get out into the North Sea in larger boats. So the harbor was important for that, and the construction of bridges and changing the canal made it so that all of this travel on boats would be easy. Jurisdiction of Copenhagen was always very disputed. In 1416, Eric of Pomerania inherited the throne, and he went on to rule over Sweden and Norway, but did this alongside Margaret I, who was the leader of the Kalmar Union. Later, the city would become fully Danish and go under full Danish royal control. In 1445, Copenhagen was officially named the capital of the Kingdom of Denmark. And this change to becoming a capital would be followed by even more change as the Protestant Reformation swept across Europe. Copenhagen and Greater Denmark were directly involved in some of the biggest conflicts of the Protestant Reformation, like the 30 Years' War. In conflicts like this, Copenhagen was burned down many times, faced many fires, and faced a lot of overall attacks in a multiple century period, especially in the 15 to 1600s. But despite that, trade was able to continue at the time, trading between Copenhagen for the fish and all different things that they were selling at the time was very, very consistent. And I mentioned it briefly just there, the fish. Herring was a thing that was discovered all over the area and just in the North Sea that Copenhagen had access to, and it became the biggest block of its trade. So much so that Copenhagen was literally put on the map for merchants because of the fact of the herring trade being so big, because the Dutch consume a bunch of herring. It's very important to their cuisine, and this is not common. This is not uncommon across most of Europe, where herring was very much in high demand, and the Danish took full advantage of that. After this, King Christian IV was crowned the King of Denmark in Copenhagen and worked heavily to expand the city. His direct changes were that he added new districts to the city and fortified it with new defenses, and he moved Copenhagen into becoming the heart of the Nordic world in his mind. He continued to facilitate trade through the Baltic and North Sea, and then started to open factories. He started to move all sorts of things around so that the city could be continuously expanded. By the end of his reign, Copenhagen had become the tip top. Copenhagen was now the financial, naval, commercial, and trade capital of Denmark, and all of this was done by 1648 when the king dies. Also in this era is the wars with Sweden. Now, Denmark and Sweden have very good relations today, but they have had more direct declared wars between each other than any other two nations in the world. The one I'm talking about right now is the one in 1658 that went on until 1660. During this time, you can guess it, Copenhagen did get burned again. Fire was all over during attacks, and it messed up the economy. It messed up a lot of things for Copenhagen because the city was doing what it had done for hundreds of years, and that's continued to rebuild after attacks, and specifically fires. Bad things continued for Copenhagen at this time as another plague broke out in 1711 and ended up killing about a third of the population of Copenhagen during its spread. Right after this, another fire broke out in Copenhagen. Fire became a genuine problem for Copenhagen, and it was happening too often and was always deadly when it did. There was one in 1728 and in 1795. The one in 1795 destroyed nearly a quarter of the city. So there's jokes that even when I was in Denmark, the Danes were making with me about how often in history Copenhagen had burned down, which is all too often, as we're seeing right here. The 1800s started with a bang, literally when the British started to bomb Copenhagen in 1801. This was a famous battle where naval leader Horatio Nelson turned the blind eye, or as they say here, put the telescope to the blind eye, when he was ordering a siege and a bombing of Copenhagen. There was apparently a ceasefire drawn and a ceasefire flag waved, but he turned a blind eye to it, continuing to bomb the city into submission. And this wasn't even the end. In 1807, the Brits would invade again, starting another Battle of Copenhagen, where this time they would bombard and siege the city for so long that it was really devastating. This was a British victory, and Britain claimed certain naval rights and continued to establish himself as the premier navy of the world, under the leadership of men like Horatio Nelson and his disciples. But the worst part about this is, for the next 25 years or so, there's a huge economic downturn in Copenhagen that is mainly because of trade slowing and a lot of different areas being controlled by Britain, but it was also because of how much money was being poured into rebuilding and refortifying the city for the upteenth time because of the destruction from the Brits, just like there was destruction from the fire beforehand. The fires. The many fires that happened. Major revolutions occurred in both 1830 and in 1848. They pushed for a lot of change and were at first unsuccessful, but eventually the 1848 revolution did cause Denmark to change from a full absolute monarchy to a constitutional monarchy that had a lot more representation for the people. Then in 1850, more change occurred. Copenhagen, now more settled than it had been before, sought to expand the city. The reason they needed to do this was because they had just lost the Second Schleswig War against Austria and Prussia. This caused Denmark to lose roughly a third of its total area, and in turn caused Copenhagen to be completely flooded with new people who were Danish wanting to live in Danish land, moving into the capital. And this caused the population of around 100,000 that were living in just the Old Town to expand all the way throughout the city, as they had to make room for more people coming in from all over what was formerly Denmark. In the 1900s, Copenhagen continued to cement itself as the most important part of both Denmark and the trade region of Northern Europe. It was very important, even compared to major competitors like Sweden. But the biggest event was World War II. During this war, Denmark was occupied from April of 1940 to May of 1945. In 1943, the Danes tried their best to resist the Germans, and this was when they sank many ships in the Copenhagen harbor to stop Germans from getting across different canals to get them in the royalty. And this didn't work perfectly, but it is a representation of the Danes trying to fight against the World War II Germans and push past everything that was happening to them. Things finally started to settle after World War II officially ended. For the next 2 decades, Copenhagen would go up and down, dealing with unemployment, deurbanization, and different things, at the same time as they started to really delve into the private sector and offering services that became world-renowned. Denmark started to invest in its tourism. Copenhagen became a very tourist-heavy city because of the Tivoli Gardens, because of other things that were very important to it. On top of this, food started to become very important. Chefs started showing up, and then there was manufacturing, factories. All of that invested into Copenhagen over the next 40 years after the war, which really go into Copenhagen becoming a very successful, stable, and financially successful city. In 1990, a fully automated subway system was started in Copenhagen and was officially completed in 2002. But in between that time and 2000, the Øresund, hope I'm saying that right, link was created as a half underground, half above ground railway to connect Copenhagen to the nearest city of Sweden, which is Malmö. Malmö is now a city that has a successful university, has a lot of young people that are going to Copenhagen and back. So the creation of this link is a good link between Sweden and Denmark, despite all the things they had been through in the past. In December of 2009, Copenhagen played host to the COP15 meeting, which is still to this day one of the most successful and important climate meetings in the history of our world. And all that brings us to the present, where today Copenhagen is one of the most developed, expensive, and unique cities in Europe. The city has a bustling nighttime street, popular market halls, food halls, a bustling kind of beer scene, an incredibly famous cuisine scene, fantastic amusement parks, all sorts of things like that that define Copenhagen. Copenhagen is the entrance to the north, at least to me it is, and it gives a real taste of what life is like in that Scandinavian area that is Nordic, that Northern Europe, that is unique to everyone else, that has this life. It does. The quality of life, the tax system, everything. You go to Copenhagen and you feel what it's like to be a part of those big 3 countries, Norway, Sweden, Denmark. And despite how different they all are, completely, utterly different, this is your start. And this is, to me, my favorite city in the area. But that is all the history I have for you here. And with that, I just want to say there's a lot more history to Copenhagen that even I didn't cover, but I did cover in much more detail in the podcast, Young History, which is what started my whole love for history. So the link to that is going to be down below. If you guys want to listen to that, I would encourage you to, because I did do a pretty deep dive into the history of this country and the city. And specifically, I did the city for this episode, but I did cover the history of Denmark itself earlier in Young History, so I'll have all that linked below so you can learn a whole lot about both Copenhagen, the capital, and the greater history of Denmark as you study all the history you can study. So that's all the history I have for you today. And now that we've gotten through some of the history as an overview for Copenhagen, let's talk about some of the sites that are here and the history of them. Christiansborg Palace is the castle I mentioned that was built in 1167 by a bishop. Today, that is Christiansborg Castle, which was built on top of the old one's grounds. The Royal Library was built on these grounds as well. And in 1999, the Black Diamond was built as a glass extension of this library. Since 1928, the palace has been home to the Parliament, Supreme Court, and the Foreign Office, despite its origins as a royal palace. Tivoli Gardens. Danish entrepreneur Georg Carstensen opened the Tivoli Gardens on August 15th of 1843. Carstensen was inspired by amusement parks he went and saw abroad and suggested them to King Christian VIII to keep him on the throne. The park featured a theater, restaurants, cafes, mechanical rides, and a scenic railway. The composer, H.C. Lombe, conducted the orchestra for the first 30 years Tivoli was around, and Tivoli was the inspiration for the famous Disney World of today. Rosenborg Castle. It was built by Christian IV in the early 17th century as a pleasure palace, and completed in 1624. It was designed in the Dutch Renaissance style, and the castle features elegant spires, ornate gables, and richly decorated interiors throughout the entire place. Initially, it was intended as a summer home. Rosenborg became a favorite retreat for Christian IV, who used it for both leisure and state affairs. Over time, the castle transitioned into a royal treasury, and then began housing Denmark's crown jewels and royal regalia. In 1838, Rosenborg Castle opened to the public as a museum, showcasing the history of the Danish castle monarchy throughout the history of this period, with art, artifacts, and royal collections that span across the centuries of their rule. Now that we've gotten through the history of some of the coolest sites, let's hop into some tips. My first tip, as always, is book early. There's lots to do in Copenhagen between different tours, museums, touring the canals, seeing major castles, all things like that. Booking early will save you time and money, especially as you get to the summer season where Copenhagen, which lies in the Nordic part of Europe, the way northern part, it gets cold throughout the entire year, but the best time to go is summer where it's way nicer than it'll ever be the rest of the year. So booking early, especially in summer, is going to save you time, money, and get you some set plans to do when you're in the city. My next suggestion is to eat at a place called Torverhallen. There's a food hall not far from Tivoli, or the main station, that is a huge collaboration of different small business food chains in Copenhagen. I had the best meals in Copenhagen here, so being able to eat here for a reasonable price made me very happy. My favorites were a French spot inside that does a duck confit sandwich, as well as one called I Heart Fisk, which does an open-faced fried fish sandwich and a crawfish sauce. It was literally one of my favorite meals in Europe, even after going through the whole thing. This is also a good spot to try more bread, which is the Danish open-faced tapas on bread, and is one of the most famous dishes that the Danes make. For dessert, walk over to the Summer Bird and have flødebolle. It's a trademarked Copenhagen dish, so it can only be made by this business in Copenhagen. It's a mascarpone-filled truffle with chocolate in its base, and they're kind of covered in chocolate to make these little dollops of dessert, and they are tiny and they're really, really good. The only negative I have to say about this place is the Mexican food. Now, if you were smart, you would expect this, because the Danes and Denmark are thousands and thousands of miles away from Mexico, which means the Mexican food should not be expected to be good like it is in Texas and California and most of the southwestern United States. I personally was not that smart, and I ate at this Mexican spot in the food hall that was suggested to me. So not only was it overpriced, but it was extremely underwhelming. It was average Mexican food at best. It just had a really good PR team, and it costed me like $27 American. So absolutely ridiculous. Do not eat Mexican here. If you have a taste for Mexican food, don't do it in Denmark. Just wait till you're somewhere better. And then that brings me to my final tip of visiting Copenhagen, and it is to do the triple event combo of the politically incorrect walking tour, the beer walking tour, and the bar crawl. The first two were literally legendary. My day started with me in my hostel and a guy walking around saying, "Hey, I'm doing this tour, just come with me." It was a guy advertising because he was a tour guide. This is one of those walking tours where there's no cost to go, but then you tip the guy after. Free walking tours are extremely common around Europe. It is free to go, but it is expected that you tip. So, bring euros in most countries. In this case, bring your Danish krones and make sure that you're going to take care of these people, because they're walking around and telling you about the city for free, but it is their job. And then he followed that up with giving us a lot of history and a lot of fun, which was fantastic. And then he advertised at the end that because we came with him, we get a discount on this combo ticket to go to the beer walking tour later that day and to a bar crawl that night. The beer walking tour may have been the single most fun thing I did in Europe as a singular event. It was this tour where it's literally a tall Dane, very funny tall Dane, fills a cooler with a bunch of Danish beer and walks us around the city. He points to different breweries. He tells us the history of the beer we're drinking and some history of the city while also giving food advice. And then if you want, you could stay after and have some drinks at the bar with him and the people you walked with. And you think you're not going to get messed up because you have this little 4-ounce glass of beer that you're starting with. But then, you have refills. Some people don't like the flavor, so you have an extra. I ended up considerably sloshed after this. And then I had to follow that up with the bar crawl I already paid for. So then I go across the city to the bar crawl, and the bar crawl was fun. It was a little long, and there was times where it was dead, but on the weekend, it's extremely fun and very popular. And this is where I got the suggestion to do other things in the city, like going to the canal, which I didn't mention before, but little side kind of honorable mention is my tour guide for the bar crawl said that one of the funnest things to do, most fun things to do, in Copenhagen is to go swim in the canals, just because of the fact that they use their taxes to clean this. They use the really high taxes in Denmark. Part of it goes towards making the canals really clean, and people from all over Europe and locals were hopping right in with me, and the sights were great there. And it was extremely cold, but it was very refreshing. It was one of the favorite things I did there as well. But definitely, my biggest suggestion is to do that triple event thing, the politically correct tour, into the beer tour, into the bar crawl. It'll make for a crazy fun day, and I believe, if not wrong, you can separate them out. So if you want to do one day and then use the other one within the next 2 days, you can. But either way, it makes for a great day. It was a great way to see the city, get suggestions, figure out things to do. I had a fantastic time, and I highly suggest you do it as well. And with all that, with the history, the historical sites, the travel tips, and my general yapping, that is all I have for you today. I'm very, very glad you guys came to check this out. I'm going to be very consistent with posting this year. That is my goal. I have so much history to share with you guys. There's so much I'm genuinely passionate about putting out and talking about globally, not just these fun European cities or ones I saw in the United States. I want to talk about the world and everything going on and just everything. I'm from the United States, so I know how much my country affects the world. So being able to talk about that in the positive and negative lights that it might be at any given time, I look forward to that. So, but today was, fun history. We had to talk about a specific place, but there's going to be a lot on the channel soon, and I'm just very glad you're here. So thank you guys for checking me out. If you guys liked it, please like it down below and subscribe so you can see whenever I'm posting stuff, because there will be a whole lot more coming this year, and I hope you guys see all of it. So one more time, my name is Reese Garlinski. This is where you want to be, and that was Copenhagen. Thank you guys so much, and have a good one.